Hey guys, I'm Erin. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing a midway check-in for the Our Fantasy Bingo Board. So if you have not heard of what the Our Fantasy Bingo Board is, I will first off leave a link below to the Reddit post that explains the whole board, all the prompts, all the rules, etc. But in brief, it is a year-long, from April to the next March, bingo board hosted by r/fantasy on Reddit. And it is a 5x5 bingo board with 25 prompts, and they have one prompt, and then each prompt has a hard mode version that just makes it a little bit harder for people who want a little bit more of a challenge. At the end of the year, you can submit your books on, there's another post for submissions, and if you've completed the board, you'll get a little flare under your username if you are a member of the Our Fantasy subreddit, and it's just fun. It's a fun time. This will be my third year working on and hopefully completing the bingo board, and everyone kind of approaches it differently as far as how they do TBRs, how they kind of attack it. And for me, for the first 6 months of the challenge, I just read like normal. I don't make any TBRs. I have a page in my book journal where I have all the prompts listed, and I fill them in as I hit them. So when I finish a book, I'll see if it fits, and if it does, I'll put it down. But I don't have a TBR working towards for the first 6 months. And then at the 6-month mark, I will check in and see how many prompts I have left, what they are, and at that point, I will make a TBR for the remaining ones to make sure I hit them. So that works for me just because I read enough books that I don't need to plan all 25 in order to hit them. Like if I got to 6 months and I hadn't hit any of them, I could still fit 25 in. So that works for me. Some people I know will plan all of them because they just don't read enough books in a year to not have them planned and still think they'll hit them. But you know, whatever works for you, works for you. And so for my check-in today, I'm just going to go through each line and mention what book I read for that square and if it fits the hard mode, and I guess what the hard mode task was if it does fit. And then when I hit a square that I have not read for, I will talk about what my book I have decided to add to my TBR to fulfill that square is. So of the 25 squares, I have completed 20 of them, and I have 5 left, which is definitely doable in 6 months, like easy. I definitely think I'll complete this without a problem. Okay, so let's get started. So on the first row, the first is a book from Our Fantasy's top LGBTQ list, and the hard mode was book or series that received 10 votes or less on that list. And so I read Starless by Jacqueline Carey, which does fit the hard mode of 10 votes or less. Next is Weird Ecology, a story that takes place in a world that is wildly different from our own and includes such things as unique environments, strange flora and fauna, unusual ecosystems, etc. Hard mode being not written by Jeff Vandermeer or China Miéville. And for this one, I read The Oleander Sword by Tasha Suri, which does fit the hard mode. Next is Two or More Authors, which I have not read yet, which is obviously a book written by 2 or more authors, and then the hard mode being 3 or more authors. And so the book I'm planning on reading will not fit the hard mode, and that is The Liar's Knot by Emma Carrick. Emma Carrick is a pseudonym for 2 authors, Alec Helms and Marie Brennan, and this is the second book in the Rook and the Rose trilogy, and I really ought to have read it by now. Next is Historical SFF, any book within the historical fantasy subgenre, hard mode being not based in Britain or Ireland, and I read the Book of Gothel by Mary McMine, which is hard mode because it is based in Germany. And then last on this row is Set in Space, which any book set primarily at least 50% off planet, and for this one, in hard mode being characters are not originally from Earth. And for this one I read Hunt the Stars by Jessie Mihalik, which is also hard mode. On to the second row. So our first square is standalone, and the hard mode is not on Our Fantasy's favorite standalones list. And for this one, I read The Girl from Shadow Springs by Ellie Cipher, and that is also a hard mode. Next is Anti-Hero, which is just a book with a main character who is an anti-hero, and the hard mode is a YA book with an anti-hero. And so I read The Golden Enclaves by Naomi Novik, which does not fit the hard mode. Next is Book Club or Read-Along book, which is any past or active Our Fantasy book club or read-along book, and the hard mode is a current one in which you also participated in the discussion thread. And so I read Sphere by Nicola Griffith for this one, but it was not hard mode because I did not read it during the month that they did the discussion. Next is Cool Weapon, where at least one main character uses a weapon with magical properties. Hard mode weapon has a unique name, and for that one I am reading The Blood of Olympus by Rick Riordan, which is the 5th book in the Heroes of Olympus series, and this one also fits hard mode as Percy Jackson's sword, which is the weapon I was thinking of when I chose this one, is named Riptide, so it has a name. And then the last box on this row is Revolutions and Rebellions, a book featuring a revolution. Hard mode, the revolution is the main focus of the plot, and for that I read The Vanished Queen by Elizabeth Campbell. On to the third row. The first square is name in the title. A character's first or last name appears in the title. Hard mode, the title has the character's first and last name. So I read Ariadne by Jennifer Saint, which does not fit the hard mode. Next, author uses initials. Read a book by an author who goes by their initials. Hard mode, initials are a pseudonym and not from the author's actual name. And for this, I read Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, which also fits the hard mode as her real name is Ursula Vernon. Next is published in 2022, which might have been the easiest square in this entire thing to fulfill without even thinking about it. And that is obviously a book published for the first time in 2022, no reprints and no new editions. And then the hard mode is it's a debut novel. And so for this one, I read A River Enchanted by Rebecca Ross, which is not a debut, so it did not hit the hard mode. Although I definitely probably read books that hit the hard mode. That was just the first one I ended up writing down, I guess. Next is urban fantasy, just any book that has an urban fantasy setting, and the subgenre in hard mode has an LGBTQ plus POV character. And for this, I read Ruby Fever by Ilona Andrews, which does not fit the hard mode. And then the last square on this row is set in Africa, which book set in Africa, and then the hard mode is author is of African heritage. And so for this, I read Lagoon by Nnedi Okorafor, which also fits the hard mode as the author is Nigerian American, and Nigeria is also where the book was set. On to the fourth row. So the first one is non-human protagonist, main character must not be human or partially human. Hard mode, non-humanoid protagonist, so like no elves, angels, dwarves, such. So for this one, I read Glent by Raven Kennedy, and the main character in that is, I think they're Fae? Fae or Elven? I now can't remember. It was one of those two, but the book has somewhat disappeared from my mind. But either way, one of those two, and neither would be hard mode, because that's still humanoid, so I think they're Fae. I think Fae is, it's not elves, I think it's Fae. I didn't read that long ago, I should remember. That series has really largely disappeared from my mind, if we're being honest. Next was Wibbly Wobbly Timey Wimey, any book that deals with time not behaving as it should, and a hard mode is no time travel. So for this one, I read The House of Always by Jen Lyons, which also fits hard mode, and this one, really most of the books in that series could have fit, but I chose House of Always because it felt like the most Wibbly Wobbly Timey Wimey. Okay, so our next square is 5 SFF short stories, and that's just any short story as long as you read 5 of them, and then the hard mode is read an entire SFF anthology or collection. So for this, I am planning on reading River of Silver by S.A. Chakraborty, which is her new collection of stories from the Daevabad trilogy, and so I want to read this one soon because I recently finished Empire of Gold, and so I kind of want to read it while the series is still fresh, but I don't own it yet, and if I just end up not getting a copy in time to read it for this challenge, then my backup is going to be Stone Sword Table, which is a bunch of King Arthur retellings. So hopefully though I just get River of Silver soon and read that, and then I will keep this for next year's short story square. Next is features mental health story, takes a strong interest in or explores themes like mental wellness and illness, self-care, and so on. Hard mode, not the Stormlight Archives or any of books in the linked list, and there's a list, so just list of SFF. So for this one, I read Elder Race by Adrian Tchaikovsky, and this is hard mode as well. And then last on this row is self-published or indie publisher. Self-published or published through a small indie publisher. If the novel has been picked up by a publisher, as long as you read it when it was self-pubbed, it will count. Hard mode is self-pubbed and has fewer than 100 ratings on Goodreads, or indie publisher that has done an AMA with our fantasy. So for this one, I read Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, and this has been picked up by a major publisher, but I read this back pretty close to when it came out, within a month or two. At that point, it had not yet been republished, so it still counts. On to our last row. So for the first square, we have award finalists, but not one, any book that was shortlisted but didn't win an award, and then hard mode is not Hugo or Nebula nominated. And so I have not read for this square yet, and the one I am planning on reading is Winter's Orbit by Everina Maxwell. This one I chose off the Locust Awards list. It was shortlisted, but it didn't win in its most, I guess, the most recent Locust Awards, whether that's 2021 or 2022. There's a chance I've also already read a book that fits this square, and I just don't realize it because I really only checked the the Hugo and Locust Awards from like the past like 2 or 3 years, and that's just kind of, I didn't deep dive on these lists, so maybe I read one already that fits, but either way, I'm going to read this one, and this one will fit for that. So next is BIPOC author must be Black, Indigenous, or person of color. Hard mode, a book written by an Indigenous author. So for this one, I read Fevered Star by Rebecca Roanhorse, which does also count for hard mode. And then next is Shapeshifter. At least one character has the ability to change their physical form. Hard mode, the most prominent shifter in the story is not a wolf or dog shifter, so like no werewolves. So I have not read this one, and for this one I'm thinking The Mortal Word by Genevieve Cogman will work, because if I'm remembering correctly, Kai, one of the main characters in this one, is a dragon shifter. He's definitely a dragon, and I think he can shift between dragon and human forms, I think. So if I read this, and he ends up not shifting, in it. Then my backup is going to be the Books of Rexia by Martha Wells, which I have heard worked for this. I don't remember what kind of shifters those are, but I've seen that one recommended a lot in the recommendation thread. So if this one doesn't work, I'll read that one, but I'm hoping this one just to minimize starting a new series while I'm still trying to finish some. Okay, so our next square is no ifs, ands, or buts, which is title that does not include the following words: the, a, and, or, if, of, but. And hard mode, this title is 3 words or more. So for this one, I read Firebreak by Nicole Corner Stace, which does not fit the hard mode, obviously. And then our last square is Family Matters, a book that features biological family ties. Any relation, just as long as the relationship plays a part in the story. And hard mode features at least 3 generations in a single family. So for this one, I read Beauty by Robin McKinley, and that does not fit the hard mode. All right, so that was all the books I read for bingo. If you're participating in bingo, let me know how you're doing, what you're looking forward to reading for it, or if you have other suggestions for the squares. Like, I have TBR book set, but like if I read a different book that fits it, like that's cool too. And if you have any suggestions for any of those, just let me know, and I will see you in my next video.